So our next panel is the last panel that we have on the agenda, which is panel 5. Panel 5 will be discussing neocolonialism and neoliberalism in Latin America. So round of applause for our panel. Brief introduction, we have Abraham Marquez, is an investigative journalist and LA correspondent for Kashuan News. Is that correct? All right, there you go. Over there on the right of you guys, we have Paolo Brusalegui. He is a Peruvian activist, organizer, human rights consultant, writer, commentator, co-founder of Los Ronderos de las Redes, and volunteer with the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back campaign. And here in the center, finally, we have Dr. Rodolfo Cortez Barragan. He got his PhD in Stanford University, currently works at iLabs at Washington State University, and he is a member of the Morena Placita Olvera and Huntington Park, as well as an organizer with Peace and Freedom Party and a former candidate with the Green Party. So that's my introduction. I'm going to ask the candidates, would you like to add anything else?
My name is Paulo. You can find me on Instagram and Telegram as the Peruvian Chasky. My group Los Ronderos de las Redes on X and Instagram. So we're going to start my introduction. I'm going to say that, my family is Peruvian. I have Chinese and Italian and Basque and Spanish ancestry. I come from an anti-communist family, actually. And with that legacy, I don't know much about my political, my Peruvian background, except for the cultural history, a little bit about it, what a typical person would know, outsider would know. So I was born and raised here, working with a conservative family. Some of my family, they support Trump, some support Clinton back in the day, Harris now. I was the only one who in the 2020 presidential elections in Peru, voted for Pedro Castillo, the last democratically elected president. Most of my family members voted for Keiko Fujimori. Some of my family friends that are also Peruvian or have met the Dina Bolata before. A relative of mine works at the International Monetary Fund, has met the Peruvian embassy to the U.S. And another family friend is related, actually, as a cousin to the current prime minister, to the dictatorship, the prime minister, Gustavo Andriensen. And then we're
So I'm going to speak on imperialism, and one book I highly recommend is Empire by Michael Parenti. And to start off what I'm going to say, I always want to just read off just the first page because I think it's really relevant to what's happening today in the world. Starts off, imperialism has been the most powerful force in the world history over the last 4 to 5 centuries, carving up a whole continents while oppressing indigenous peoples and obliterating entire civilizations. Yet, empires exist today as seldom accorded any serious attention by our academics, media commentators, and political leaders. When not ignored outright, the subject of imperialism has been sanitized so that empires are called commonwealths and colonies become territories. imperialist military interventions become matters of national defense, national security, and maintaining the stability in one region for another. In this book, I look at imperialism for what it really is. By imperialism, I mean the process whereby the dominant political and economic interests of one nation expropriate for their own enrichment of the land, labor, raw materials, and markets of another people. And the reason I bring that up is because there's recent events that are happening now that shed light on that. We remember in 2019 when Elon Musk tweeted, "We will coup whoever we want to coup," in reference to the right-wing coup forced upon the Bolivian people by Wall Street. What was the reason? Lithium, what they now call the white gold rush. U.S. imperial history is vast, dating back to the extermination of indigenous people and the enslavement of Africans. In fact, the U.S. was born on this expansion. The pursuit of manifest destiny forced for fruit in Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's only natural that this perfecter of capitalism and imperialism continues to allow corporations to oppress any nation it desires for their own natural resources. In short, grasping the concept of imperialism and understanding the need to oppose it can provide essential clarity as a society. As Russian revolutionary Lenin once said, imperialism represents the highest state of capitalism. In a capitalist system, a small elite that controls most of society's productive resources is driven continually to expand its wealth and power. Under imperialism, this pursuit of profits extends systemically across borders. Since World War II, the U.S. has been the leading imperialist power, shaping the global capitalist economy to favor the U.S. capitalist system. Throughout U.S. history, U.S. capitalist interests have often prioritized accumulating wealth over acquiring colonies. Rather than governing and administering other nations, they have preferred to seize the riches from afar. This form of imperialism allows the flag to remain at home while the dollar spreads globally, often with the support of the military. An example we saw this week, Chile's president decided to now recognize the democratically elected president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro. The U.S. state often advocates on behalf of multinational corporations, and often than not, the capitalists and the elected officials are the visible rotation. We are given the illusion of voting for change, but the system remains. Let me give some examples. In 1952, the indigenous people of Guatemala were the primary beneficiaries of Decree 900, also known as the Agrarian Law Reform. It was initiated by President Jacob Arbenz Guzman. This law gave Guatemalans land back by expropriating the unused land that was owned by the United Fruit Company, which they owned 42% of Guatemala's countryside, and the company was exempted from paying taxes and import duties. How did the United Fruit Company get away with it? Was the land given to them by God? At the time, Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA, and his brother John Foster Dulles, was the Secretary of State. They owned shares with the United Fruit Company. So when Arbenz pushed these social programs to get land back to the indigenous people, what followed was an invasion from Honduras with a U.S.-trained army. And what followed after that was a reversal of all of Arbenz's progressive measures. This is just one of many examples of how U.S. imperialism functions in our continent. They hire our people to do their killing. The third world, the global south, is rich. Only the people are poor. And that is because of pillage they have endured for centuries. This collusion between the state and capital has brought forth the largest empire in human history, the United States of America. With a leading role played by its expansive military force within the political structure, Republicans and Democrats alike will criminalize our immigrant community. But what they fail to mention is why our people migrate here. For our people, for Chicanos, Indigenous, Mexicanos, Salvadoreños, Palestinians, Iraqis, our journey here is a result of the vicious domination of the economic and political institutions of our homeland. It is election year, and just like clockwork, they use immigrants as a political football. Who's going to be tougher at the border, Trump or Harris? Who's going to protect Americans from this invasion or these illegal aliens? Well, we know that this country's economy depends on our labor. There was a report by the Center for American Progress that had highlighted the significant contributions of an estimated 10.4 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, including 7 million undocumented workers, 5 million of whom are essential workers who kept the country afloat during a public health crisis in 2020. These undocumented workers were the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic for the response. They were home health professionals, personal care aides, custodial staff, farm workers, construction workers, and other critical jobs. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has likewise stated that 3 in every 4 undocumented workers are essential, totaling to nearly 5 million. Furthermore, 1.7 million undocumented immigrants work in the U.S. food supply chain, with 358,000 in food processors and farm workers, with another 154,000 in convenience stores and grocery stores. Beyond what they do to keep this country moving, undocumented workers make a significant contribution to the economy through taxes. The Immigrant Immigration Council reported that in 2016, undocumented workers paid $7 billion in sales tax, $1.1 billion in income taxes, and $3.6 billion in property tax. Undocumented immigrants also own 1.6 million homes across the United States, paying the banks $20.6 billion for their mortgages every year. This is in addition to those who pay their landlord $49.1 billion in rent annually. These undocumented families hold an estimated $314.9 billion in spending power. Yet immigrants face daily harassment from law enforcement and the government on top of all this work. Joe Biden and the Democrats have promised to, quote, have a fair, orderly, and humane immigration system. It's been 4 years, he hasn't done shit. Besides keeping us afraid. I'm gonna give you some numbers. When ICE was created in 2003, shortly after 9/11, we have given them a total of $332 billion. That's 109 for ICE and 223 for Customs and Border Patrol to terrorize our people. 60% of immigrants who are detained don't have a criminal record. In the U.S., if you're a citizen, you have a right to an attorney, and if you cannot afford one, you are provided with one. If you're an immigrant, you have the right to an attorney, but you are not provided with one. So many immigrants who are detained do not speak Spanish, and they don't have any resources in the U.S., so they're just rotting in our prisons. I have visited these ICE prisons before in Adelanto. The trauma that they deal with on a daily basis, it's unbearable. It's an inhumane system. Right now, 177,000 people are in what ICE calls ATD, Alternatives to Detention Program. In other words, they have ankle bracelets. They are constantly monitored by the government. Yet the mainstream narrative in this corporate world that we live in tells us that, sorry, we just can't figure out how to fix our immigration system. There's holes in it. We just gotta work harder next time. I call bullshit. Give that $332 billion to the people, and we will build homes, healthcare facilities, schools, hospitals, mental health services to address the needs of every single person that comes to the border seeking a better life. We will tear down the cages that our children are in. We will tear down the walls that build bridges, and we will build a humane system, a system that is called socialism, that is for the people.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, Abraham. I think we can proceed with the questions. I don't need to.
All right, guys. Powerful stuff. Powerful. Thank you for powerful stuff. So for today's agenda, we have 5 excellent questions, and then we're going to do Q&A. For the panelists, be aware that sometimes if you pull the mic from you, it's a little hard to hear you. So just something to keep in mind. If anyone in the back can't hear, kindly raise your hand and let us know. And then for the panelists, I know that sometimes an answer can require a lot in a response. So if you're the second or third panelist, let us know if you need me to repeat the question and we'll do that for you. Alrighty, let's start this. Each of you are affiliated with organizations that aim to build solidarity with countries of Latin America against U.S. imperialism. To bring everyone closer to shared understanding, could you give us maybe 3 examples of how the country or countries that you are in solidarity with have been affected by U.S. imperialism?
Thank you. So that's a really fascinating question, right? We have to think. I like how the question says, so we can have like more mutual shared understanding, because I think, from yesterday, right? Like I think the forum has been a great space to for people from different organizations and different perspectives to come together and hear about. Yesterday there was debate amongst the left, and I think that's wonderful. I think we need to have more of these, and so we can hopefully learn and kind of understand each other's perspectives. So we're not just online, debating these issues in a limited character format. So imperialism in Latin America from the United States, it's a huge topic, of course. So I am Mexican. I was born in Mexico. I came here, moved to Southeast LA when I was like 9. So I have some experience living in Mexico, and now I am engaged with the Morena party, the ruling party of Mexico, essentially, and there's a lot to talk about there and about Mexico's history and trajectory. So to bring it back to U.S. imperialism, I think it's really important that we study the totality of U.S. imperialism. So I'll give you, since you asked for 3 examples, I'll give you the first example that definitely comes to my mind, and that was the second time that the United States engaged in a war against another nation state that they recognized as such. Their first war of imperial aggression and conquest that they formally declared as such. Of course, we know that they committed genocide against the indigenous people, but the first time they formally declared war in Washington, D.C. against another foreign country for reasons of conquest, of imperialism, was the Mexican-American War, the intervention by the United States into Mexico, which kind of, if you look back, it was a long time ago, right? 1848, long time ago. But if you look back on it, you'll see a lot of the same signs that we are now seeing in U.S. imperialism. You'll see the lies from the media, from the establishment media, from their press. You'll see how the politicians, in that case President Polk, really essentially lied to the Congress, to the American people, claiming that Mexico had really gone overboard and had really essentially passed the first stone, when in fact the United States military went into a disputed area and kind of waited for Mexicans to get really worried about them coming deeper into Mexico. So that was the first time, the United States flag flew in El Zócalo in Mexico City. It was the first time that had happened, that another country as such had been vanquished in a major war by the United States. Of course, we know that the result was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is the main legal reason why this area, all the way up to Utah, to Texas, became what became the United States, because it had this manifest destiny ideology, an ideology that Mexico, it was somewhat different in its colonialism, right? The Spanish did not quite seek to colonize and settle in the same type of way in the north, so that's why there was very essentially limited activity plus many years of forgetting. But the United States came in and they said, we're taking the territory. That dramatically expanded the United States, and it set the tone for the relationship between the two countries, and of course the tone for the United States' future wars of imperialism. But even though they took that part of the Mexican then territory, you asked for 3 examples. Another one, a few decades after that, many people have forgotten, during the Mexican Revolution, which was to overthrow a dictator who was backed fully by the United States because he had delivered a lot of benefits to them. He had handed a lot of mineral mines, a lot of oil extraction areas in Veracruz, in the Gulf. So the United States was profiting, but so the Mexican people decided no mas. They wanted to elect their representative rather than having this continued dictator, Porfirio Diaz. So the Mexican Revolution happened, but what did the United States do? They collaborated on assassinating the very first democratically elected president, Francisco Madero, in 1913. The ambassador in Mexico City got together with generals of the Mexican army and said, would you guys like to be president? And they said, yes. So then they marched into the presidential office and arrested the president and shot him a few days later. So now 1913, so then the United States was able to destabilize Mexico and deny it its democracy that it was barely sort of beginning a little bit. And then the third one, I would say, there was a lot of debate in the United States how to control Mexico, how to do it. And eventually, there was a leaked document sent by the Secretary of State, Lansing, Robert Lansing. He sent it to Woodrow Wilson, and he said, how to best control Mexico? By getting their essentially bourgeois elites and training them in U.S. universities. And eventually they would become presidents. And that they would even do a better job at establishing the American economic system in Mexico than the Mexicans could if they tried to install their own person. So that's what happened. We had a disaster of neoliberal presidents trained by Washington, trained by the top universities in the land, like Harvard. In 1988, we had a disaster in that someone trained in Neoliberalism, a school of economics, essentially became president. And that's why, where do you see Mexican immigration most? In the 90s, in 1994 especially, as a result of NAFTA, and the years following that. So many families, including my own, I think probably others in this room, are here because of those economic policies of warfare, economic warfare, pushed by Washington through these presidents that cooperated and sold out their own country. Hence, now they're no longer living in the country. They're a little bit of perhaps concerned about living in the country now that there has been some change. So that answers the question.
I'm going to give it 2 examples. The first being Peru. So this year, Peru has participated in 3 military exercises already with the United States government, with the U.S. Navy in occupied Hawaii at the RIP-PAC maritime exercise over the summer, and a couple of before. Peru right now is a far-right dictatorship. U.S. Southcom has a very close alliance with the Peruvian government. After the coup in 2022, of which I was personally there when it happened, when they ousted the last democratically elected president, who was a leftist president, and Peru has not seen a leftist president for a very long time. The last one being Jose Velasco Alvarado from a successful coup in 1968. And this political figure, this was a military coup in favor of the Quechua people, in favor of social reforms and progressive reforms for the country, to make Quechua a second language to speak at the schools, to bring land reform, especially, although the policies weren't effective enough. This was the first time that we've seen a leftist change in Peru. And what was happening in the 1960s and 70s was the Operation Condor, happening in South America with Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, which we know them to be the lithium triangle. So Peru, they also have a lithium deposit, uranium, gold, of course, from the historical history of the Incan Empire. But yeah, one thing I want to make a point on this great figure, Juan Velasco Alvarado, is that Hugo Chavez has heard his speech before. I think when he went to Peru and had I think it was some book. Yeah, I don't recall what was the name of it, but that's when Chavez, when he was young, a military an officer, before he became president, he made these connections, and then he was able to build the Bolivarian Revolution back in Venezuela, which Venezuela being the origin of Simon Bolivar, where the vision of the Pan-American vision of the Patria Grande originated from, with the Simon Bolivar, known in the Americas as the Great Liberator, Libertador, for freeing the Peru, Bolivia, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela. At that time in the 1820s, and that time there, they knew about the U.S. and acting as an imperialist state as they were becoming free. Through Latin America has went through 532 years of colonialism and 201 years of the Monroe Doctrine. And with that history, colonialism hasn't ended, imperialism hasn't ended, it's still, and the U.S. imperialism is there's no other imperialism. I want to mention that. There's no Soviet or Russian imperialism nor Chinese imperialism. This imperialist perspective is a distortion of Marxism and Leninism that, it's other ideologies mixed into socialism and communism to confuse the masses, so people cannot be on the same point of view that the U.S. imperialism, with over 800 military bases around the world, and encircling China, Iran, Russia, and so forth. No other country is doing that except for the United States. So, with this conflict here in Latin America, currently Peru, they had a coup in 2022, and this was supported by the U.S. government under Joe Biden, with the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Peru was appointed during the Trump administration. So she served there. Her background was in the Pentagon and the CIA, and so historically, we know that U.S. embassies are up front for U.S.-led coups, attempts, and even assassination, and for Western-backed NGOs to coordinate, orchestrate coups, to collude it. against the democratic will of the people, whether that's in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and so forth. But in other countries, Cuba, we know that it's facing the sanctions because the U.S. empire is ruthless. And in Cuba, we have a lot of solidarity with them, with people, with the government, as well as Nicaragua. I personally been to Nicaragua once last year, seeing the great transformation after the revolution, the Sandinista revolution. And at that time, the Sandinistas were facing a guerrilla warfare against the U.S. dictatorship. U.S. imperialists are very much in there still in Nicaragua and Venezuela, as we're seeing right now, with the recent elections, with the fascist coup. Going back to Nicaragua, the one example here is that the niece of the last dictator of Nicaragua, Marta de Baile, she has a podcast. She's an online influencer. She interviews a lot of celebrities here in the U.S. She grew up in Mexico, but she's in Nicaraguan descent. She is related to the Somoza de Baile family. And although she doesn't talk about politics, her relative, who also fled from Nicaragua after the revolution because they were right-wing, supportive of the family dynasty in power, there are some that went to Brazil, that are Bolsonaristas, or making those connections there. And the potential coup can happen again, like in 2018. And actually, Venezuela's recent coup attempt looked very much similar to the violent fascist coup attempt in Nicaragua in 2018. I'll pass it to Abraham.
Three examples of how U.S. imperialism has affected a country that you're connected with. I mean, when you're a country in the global south, in Latin America, U.S. imperialism presently provides as miserable as possible. That is a fact. In 2022, the Pentagon published a report, the National Defense Strategy. In that report, it states that if any country that decides to charter their own path of independence, that they are going to isolate them, sanction them, really hard for them to be independent. I was very fortunate to go to Nicaragua in 2021 to observe the presidential elections. So I'll speak on Nicaragua because when I was there, they had their revolution in 1979. They overthrew the dictator of the Somoza family. That in 1979 to 1990, they had a revolution, a socialist government in power. And they made education free, constitutional right. Healthcare is free, constitutional right. Housing was cheaper. All the benefits that you can think of a socialist program. And in 1990, when they decided to have an election, and they lost the election to a U.S.-backed Chamorro. And in 1990 to 2005, all of a sudden you got a hospital bill. All of a sudden you got to pay to go to school. Poverty went up. You started seeing homeless people. And from some of the people that I talked to, they didn't even include the revolution in the history. They don't want people to know their own history. Right? And since then, since 2005 to now, education's free. They're building hospitals, state-of-the-art hospitals, and it's free. I had a friend that got a stomach bug, went into the hospital, got tended to walk out. It's kind of, if you live in the U.S., it's kind of unheard of to walk into a hospital and walk out with no bill. Hey, come back in 2 days to see how you're doing, right? So Nicaragua has continually to defend itself from U.S. imperialism. When Ortega was reelected, they called him a dictator in power for 5 elections now, or 5 terms now. At the same time, I think Angela Merkel had just won her 4th election. Her meeting was like considered the darling of the West, and considered like, oh, she's the best. It's like, but you're calling this brown guy from the South a dictator because he's helping the people. So when you have a government that's in power to serve the needs of the people, to serve the poor, they're constantly going to be under attack no matter what, whether it's a socialist government or a religious one or whatever it is, and they're there to serve the people. They're always going to be under attack. A weapon that the U.S. also uses to destabilize the society is by controlling their food as well. We saw that a lot in the early '90s. So Nicaragua said, "All right, we're gonna be food sovereignty." So 96% of the food that people eat in Nicaragua, they grow it themselves. And if you want to own a farm, you want to be able to also raise cows or pigs, have a farm, the government will fund it for you and help you grow it. And they use natural chemical and natural resources they don't use the kind of simple stuff that we use here to clean their foods and all that stuff. So now the U.S. wants to sanction them on food, well, they can feed themselves.
All right. Before we move on to question number 2, I do want to tell the gentlemen who are standing up, we do have 4 chairs here in the front, and unless you kind of stand for over an hour, I kind of recommend you guys take a seat over here. There's 2 right there and 2 right here. All right, lots of information on that first question. Here we go, question number 2. How would you say that economic neoliberalism has been playing out in these countries? And what have been the path of resistance? Who wants to take this question first?
Peru has had many conservative governments. They have neo-fascists. They don't have swastikas. That's not how it is in Latin America for the most part. But there are, you say, anti-indigenous, racists in power in Peru because of the colonial history, where Peru's capital is set on the Pacific Ocean side of the Pacific Ocean, and it's a port city called Lima, and through its long history of centralism or centralismo, so they have a concentration of wealth for centuries at the capital, giving nothing, no work or educational opportunities for indigenous population in the Andes, in the Selva, or in the provinces, the rural regions. So whilst the capital has been developing, the masses have become more frustrated, and there have been Peru has a history of a revolt, as well as massacres, unfortunately. Many injustices to previous presidents. One being the recent, what the Peru has written many books of the last dictator, of which we have a new one, but the last dictator was referred to as Alberto Fujimori, a Japanese Peruvian. His family are wealthy, foreign dynasty. him being the first one, initiating Fujimorismo, the age of neoliberalism in Peru after Operation Condor. So when Fujimori came into power, this was in 1990. And so before then, neoliberalism was instituted in other Latin American countries forcefully, violently, during the Operation Condor with Chile and Argentina. Chile, of course, we know of the case of Salvador Allende and Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet being having many connections with the U.S., CIA, with the UK, so with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Years later, there were continuance of relationships building to further their exploitation and oppression of the land. So in Peru, how they implemented neoliberalism was through establishing a new constitution, of which Peru had been to the congressional building. They have the 12 constitutions, the largest book, the largest text being the latest one, the 1993 political constitution, implemented during Fujimori's dictatorship, just after he initiated his auto coup. And in South America, there are this type of coup called auto golpe de Estado. In Ecuador, this happened last year with the Guillermo Lasso. As well in Peru, Pedro Castillo attempted to do a self coup to close the Congress, which was a very corrupt institution with far-right politicians that were trying to oust him. So the real coup was actually to the 3 attempts of impeachments against the Democratic elected president, of which his self-coup wasn't realized or recognized, rather. The Peruvian Congress illegally or constitutionally removed him out of the power and arrested him when they had less than 2 votes to have a full agreement on having him removed, to have that formal, but they still passed that impeachment vote in December 2022. So that's the latest period when neoliberalism is still being implemented. But in the 1990s, when Fujimori was in power, he and Vladimiro Montesinos, he was a CIA asset for the Americans in the Fujimori government. And Fujimori and Montesinos implemented this neoliberal shock policies onto the masses. Although it helped to develop a lot in for the wealthier elitist classes of the non-indigenous majority, such as the white Criollo. They take a different viewpoint than the indigenous population, where the white Criollos view a positive light of Fujimori's time in office, even though historians view him as a dictator, even though the rest of the population view him unfavorably. And to this day, the Fujimoristas, as they're called, from the Fuerza Popular Party, which is run by the daughter of Alberto Fujimori, Keiko, they continue to impede any successful implementation or progressive changes. and they ousted other presidents too before Pedro Castillo. Um, and so with this current government after the 1990s coup, they still are trying to establish a real democracy in Peru. That's what's really struggling in my homeland. And I don't have any. I didn't have any connections with the indigenous population before because my family are the right wing family, as I said previously. Many of them, one is basically an economist, and he views very favorably of Fujimori through the economic lens, neoliberalism. But what was really important for me was the moral stake of these crimes against humanity and the actual genocide taking place under the Fujimori government, of which my family never cared about, nor do they care about the current situation in Peru, which many of the Peruvians in the diaspora can relate to. Many of the young people who are in solidarity with Palestine, in solidarity with other struggles abroad, feel a lot of pain of what's happening in Peru right now. And in this age differential gap here is troublesome because our parents, our other relatives who may take a different point of view, they're not politically active, but they would support the right wing. And they've normalized this genocide in Peru. When Fujimori was in power, he had these paramilitary forces on top of using the police force and the military to massacre the indigenous population during the internal armed conflict. And so at that time, the Peruvian government was technically under civil war, but they called it internal armed conflict. The same thing as in Ecuador right now. But with the communist guerrillas. The so-called communist guerrillas like the Tupac Amaru revolutionary movement, who used the symbol of the Tupac Amaru as a revolutionary figure to rally behind, which many groups do. But another one was the most infamous is Sendero Luminoso, also known as the Shining Path, which the name came from Jose Carlos Marietti's writings of what socialism and communism is for Latin America. But yeah, Sendero Luminoso had much more higher death count than the police military and the police and military, but the government was way more vicious against the population because they came from this higher class from the capital, and they come to the Amazon, they come to the mountains region, the most rural places that you find the campesinos and indigenous that are working on the land, who are at the time illiterate or not highly educated. They didn't have the amateur work opportunities, as I said before, due to centralism. So that's how these guerrilla forces were able to recruit indigenous people to join the forces. They were quite militant, and the women in the forces were militant against the Fujimori government under Sendero Luminoso. But these groups have stained the Peruvian left, the political left in Peru, because, for example, the Tupac Amaru revolutionary movement committed massacres. They also took hostages, but what was more egregious was that after that time period, in the 2020s or so, just recent history here. They committed a massacre against homosexuals. Just imagine it being the Pulse nightclub. A very devastating situation where Peru's conservative mentality of machismo still being the main influence in politics. The Sendero Luminoso went after homosexuals too, and still to this day, Peru is still not inclusive. This year, the Peruvian dictatorship declared or classified homosexuals as a mental illness, regressing how people are going to be perceived in the country. But yeah, the fight continues over there for women's rights, LGBTQIA rights. But back to the point that neoliberalism. Because of the Peruvian left being weakened by these so-called communist groups, one being a Maoist and the Sendero Luminoso, they went in solidarity with Cuba, Nicaragua, or Venezuela. Well, Venezuela not at that point, but Cuba mainly. When Cuba was training armed guerrilla forces to fight in Latin America and in Africa too. Cuba has shown a lot of solidarity with that. But yeah, because the Peruvian left was defeated, and they've been demonized heavily by the Fujimori government and Fujimoristas as terrorist supporters, as terrucos, terroristas, and so forth. This is how they did attack Pedro Castillo when he was running for office. So we had years and years and years of this frame of what the Peruvian left is. And, there are other communist groups that reject the Maoist guerrilla forces perspective. Things.
I just want to say I love hearing all that because I feel like at least I'm from Mexico, but there's so many countries, right, in Latin America, right? So I think that's probably why this forum got made, right? Like we're talking about Cuba, Nicaragua, everyone's talking about Nicaragua. So I'll again just briefly, if I say the question, so economic neoliberalism, right?
So how would you say that economic neoliberalism has been playing out in these countries, and what have been the paths of resistance?
Absolutely. So I'll try to be brief because I know we want to definitely hear from the audience. So in Mexico, I'm going to say something that is increasingly something that's being said in Mexico, and that is that it is only now, over the last few years, and definitely 2024, that Mexico has truly achieved independence. And that's because, yes, it did, quote, win its independence from Spain in the 1800s. But the United States got involved very soon after, and they were involved all throughout that century and the 20th century and the early 21st century. It's only very recently that there has been what I consider to be a true change for the left. So there was a whole panel on it yesterday. We had people from that movement, Morena. Definitely check it out on the live stream, on the record, so you can see their perspective. But I'm a member too, but I'll briefly say, because I think this is the response to neoliberalism in Mexico. So Mexico, the United States got in there economically and tried to rip up the society, to privatize everything. Yes, there have been some gains, like in 1938, the president nationalized the oil. Before the United States was just going in there and taking all the oil plus all the other resources. So there have been some gains, but it had all been rolled back by the right wing in Mexico in close collaboration with Washington, directly with Washington. It was a program of imperialism, colonialism, neocolonialism that you didn't quite see. It wasn't like an invasion at that point. It wasn't like in the 1800s, but it was economic terror against the population. So they privatized all sorts of things, mainly to say healthcare. So healthcare. Now Mexico's fighting back with a public healthcare system. Essentially, it's not quite exactly. It's not quite finished, but you're going to be able to go to the hospital for free, just like in other countries. Seniors can now do it entirely for free in Mexico. There's higher minimum wage. They doubled it in the north, even tripling it. It's tied to inflation. So unlike our minimum wage, never goes up, and certainly doesn't go up with inflation. The Morena Party is taking that road of making sure that things are the people can manage to not just live, but they're thriving. There's a very active, engaged economy. There's grants for small businesses. There's scholarships. Basically, education is going to be entirely free for those who choose the public universities. They can still go to the private ones, but Mexico is currently, over the last 6 years, and certainly the next year, since we had Dr. Scheinbaum, she won. So it's a continuation of what Lopez Obrador has done, which is essentially a very sweeping reform package that really kind of guarantees a lot of the good things in life, right? The things that we love so much. We want free healthcare, free education. Free housing is on the way. It's an interesting program. She's going to have. You're going to be able to rent for 10 years, and then you're going to own it. So that's going to be the new massive housing project that Mexico will embark on over the next few years. Plus investments in science, and all of this happened because the Morena Party kind of got it together and was able to defeat the right-wing parties at the ballot box. The right-wing parties that were just like in the United States, just two heads of the same coin, and that both backed by Wall Street, of course, by the U.S. empire. But Morena, for a lot of reasons, got it together, and really, I think, very interestingly and importantly, in Latin America, we hear about all sorts of problems when could there be a coup? If there's a new government coming in. But in Mexico, there's a continuation because of all the hard work that the Morena Party put in. So that's going to be, I think that's the response to neoliberalism in Mexico for sure.
Who remembers early last year when there was constant protests in France? Right? Because they raised the minimum wage. The retirement age from 62 to 64, right? And Macron was traveling the world, meeting with people, didn't even care. And the media was like, protest here, protest there. But there was no call to overthrow Macron, right? To overthrow the system. In 2018, Daniel Ortega and the Sandinista government were getting pressure from the international banks to raise the minimum wage from 60 to 65. And he said no. He sided with the workers. And what followed was a violent coup attempt in 2018. They killed a lot of people. A lot of people. For what? Because they wanted to put people back to work. And the party was like, no, we're going to side with the workers. 60, come on. 60, I hope everyone gets to retire at 60 and just enjoy their lives with their friends and their family. And that's how the Sandinistas was able to, the way they were able to combat the coup was that the party was really well organized. When I was there, I got to visit a state called Shenandoah. I don't know what's butchering that, but when we got there, the Sandinista party told us that in 2018, when they tried to overthrow the government, everybody in the neighborhoods took to the streets to defend the government. So the coup plotters couldn't even show their face. And the reason that they were able to do that is the party, when they ran for re-election in 2005, the way they campaigned was not through radio or TV. They went door to door. They went to barrio talking to people. What are the needs that your family needs? What do you want your future to be And by doing that, doing the groundwork, you're going to support a government that supports the people, and that's how they do it.
Alrighty, excellent. I am gonna push for just a little more easier response, lighter response. The third question: when thinking about neocolonialism, Venezuela is on the minds of many of us at this moment. What do you think the attempted coup in Venezuela says about the United States' current day general attitude towards Latin America? Who would like to be the first? All right, no pressure.
Yes, so absolutely we have to be in solidarity with the Venezuelan people, with the Venezuelan government. We have to be in solidarity and we have to face the facts. This is a long-term project. The Venezuelan people have shown us very clearly that this is their project. They want, the Venezuelan government to be. They want Maduro. First they wanted Chavez. Now they want Maduro. It's a continuation of their project. Just as I was saying, for Mexico, there's a continuation from AMLO to Sheinbaum. These are continuing projects that the people have embarked on for decades. They struggled, and they won. And they're continuing to win. We saw this was very clear intervention on behalf of the right-wing bloc in Latin America that is a client of the United States. We're seeing it every day, and I'm so happy to see that other countries on the left in Latin America, Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, they got together, their presidents, and they issued a call for respect, right? A respect for the choice of the Venezuelan people and for transparency. But they are consolidating. There is a very important movement for solidarity within Latin American governments, and I think that's what we're doing here, and it's what we have to keep on doing so that we can have liberation in Latin America and here.
Personally, I think Maduro is one of the most dynamic and intelligent leaders that is going to be studied forever. The way he's been able to absorb and handle every single attack in the U.S. and still come out on top just shows the support that he has of the people, the support he has for his country. And, going into this election, I think most of us probably already knew that the U.S. was going to do something. They're going to intervene in any kind of way possible. Whether it was the media blitz, having the opposition call fraud, as they always do. But what we're seeing is that Venezuela is going to continue to defend their revolution. And following Venezuela, it's interesting because when the U.S. needs something, when they need oil, they don't call Juan Guaido. They call Nicolas Maduro. And it just shows they know who's in power there. They know that the real government there is the PSUV, and the Maduro is elected official. And they're gonna try their way to try to remove them. But what we're seeing is the unity within the people, and we just gotta continue to support the project.
Yeah, we saw this media this months and months in advance. This coup attempt. Every time that Venezuela has their elections, the U.S. is always barking on this thought that he's going to get ousted this time. I mean, how many times are they going to try it? So this is a chaotic violence coup attempt. Some of these rioters actually were paid like $150 to do so. And as I said, that Nicaragua, it can lead to that point, and it did so in 2018. What they call the same thing as a blockade, with the tires being put on fire. But in Venezuela, they some were killed for allegedly being Chavista supporters. And the right wing, who are always online, not in person, they go online and fabricate the story, the narrative of what's happening on the ground. And there's overwhelming to say that the overall wanting freedom for Venezuela because they're under a dictatorship and under Maduro. This is entirely not the case. Peru is living in actual dictatorship. This is the literal dictatorship that is supported by the United States government. And the U.S. has a long history of supporting actual dictatorship, not just in Latin America, but in Africa, in the Middle East, like monarchy. Monarchies are a form of dictatorship too. But for Maduro's case, he's always having elections to prove that he is a democratically elected president, that the people are on his side. And the U.S. is always trying to undermine the democratic will of the Venezuelan people, as well as the Nicaraguans, as well as the Cubans, and all these anti-imperialist countries as well. So they're always finding new ways, but playing the same old tactics as they've done so in other countries. For Peru's case, Peru was the first country to recognize the losing candidate who got into second place, Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia, who was the front candidate for Maria Camacho, who was supposed to be running, but she was under investigation for corruption. But it's similar things with the even in the U.S., but in Peru, where the right wing would say that this is a fraudulent election. They said this. Trump said this in 2020, and then they started this January 6th riot, the insurrection at the Capitol. In Peru, we didn't see that effect, but Keiko Fujimori, when she was running against Pedro Castillo, they said it was a close election. So that's when they had Fujimori claimed in the media that this was a fraudulent election. We were going to check all the actas and the tally votes and stuff. Just like they're doing the process right now in Venezuela. But in Venezuela, they're going to official channels like to the Supreme Court. But everything that the Western media and the U.S. government is saying is that we have to look to an independent channel, like an independent observer. But these independent groups are, of course, NGOs and stuff. There were over like 900 international observers that came to Venezuela for the election. Some of them are, of course, the Western backed. Others came officially from the by invitation by the PSUV. And some of them were Peruvian elected officials. And these people are from the Party for Libre, and they've accounted that this election was fair, it's a free election, it's a safe one, and the Western backed groups are saying otherwise, because we know what their motive is. They're here to undermine the Bolivar Revolution, undermine the anti-imperialist project, undermine the Pan-American vision as well. They want to implement a neo-colonial state onto Venezuela because they look at the Venezuela like it's a weak revolution at the first. Because we hear months, years actually, when Trump was in office and said, look at Venezuela, it's always their attack dog, or their attack, they always attack it, looking at how poor people are over there, or that they're immigrating here. And they're even immigrating to, they're also immigrating to Peru, and then the Peruvian are right. They call them criminals, thieves. So all this frame in the media is is demonizing the Venezuelan people, and they're trying to point that at Maduro as that it's his fault. When in actuality, it's always been the sanctions illegally imposed, the gold at the Bank of England being held as a hostage, all those the U.S. embassy given to Guaido and such back when he was purported to be the president at the time, appointed as the puppet by the Americans during Trump's term.
All right. Appreciate you guys for keeping it brief. Looking at the audience, this is the last question. So I'm hoping everyone's ready and energized. Last question. This is a two-part question. Are you guys ready? All right, come on. Here we go. Many coups have been carried out in Peru, Bolivia, Venezuela, Chile, and most other countries in Latin America. Why do you think some of these countries are able to combat coups while some are not? And then the second part to that question is, what would you suggest as far as solidarity with these countries going forward? Who wants to go first?
As far as for what I know with Nicaragua, the reason they were able to beat the coup in Tanzania, I think is the strength of the party and how the party has been able to get into the communities. I got a chance to talk to a lot of the youth that are involved, and it's the elders will tell me, the young people don't know what we went through to get what they have. Like, they don't understand how now the youth have free education, free healthcare, roads and hospitals. So the reach to them is very, very important. And I think, to keep it short, it's the strength of the party.
All right, so I will have to concur with Abraham on, say, Mexico. So Mexico is not usually talked about as having a coup anytime recently, right? I mean, I talked briefly at the beginning about how in 1913, the United States ambassador collaborated to assassinate the Mexican president. That was a coup, but it's a while back, right? But in Mexico, they used to say there were no coups, but there's kind of soft coups, media coups. I'll tell you, recently, in this, a few months ago, 2 months ago, last month, today, there's an ongoing process built by the international right wing, definitely the United States, to delegitimize Mexico, and in particular, delegitimize the President AMLO and his successor, Claudia Sheinbaum. In particular, branding them, alleging that they're in some ways tied to the drug industry, to the narcos, essentially. There's a hashtag that was created out of Argentina and in Europe. They trace the origin of the hashtag, and it's narco presidente, narco president. They're trying to allege that AMLO has some type of ties to organized crime, when in reality, that's what happened before. Like a decade ago, that's when the president was actually, president of Mexico was actually tied to organized crime. All proven. There's trials in New York about how the Mexican government officials were in league with organized crime, and the United States knew about it. They even armed those officials. If you want to look into it, it's all over all New York Times, it's Genaro Garcia Luna, who was the FBI, essentially, of Mexico head, the Attorney General of Mexico. He was tied to organized crime for sure. And his, quote, boss, the president then, Calderon, was also obviously tied to organized crime. And that was tied to the United States. As yesterday we talked about, Luis Rodriguez brought up the connection between the CIA and the Contras, all that happened here in Los Angeles, starting in in the 60s, 70s. So the same story has been playing out for a long time. But they're trying to brand AMLO, who's a good guy. He prides himself on being ethical and being honest, forthright. And they try to brand him as a narco president and then Sheinbaum as a narco candidate with no evidence whatsoever. None. But they want to engage in that destabilization of Mexico because, of course, it's very good for U.S. capitalists to have a destabilized Mexico. They can drive down wages, they can take the resources, etc., etc., etc. So even when there's not a direct military coup, there can still be other types of soft coups, and we have to watch out for them. Thankfully, the party is everything, really. So Morena has succeeded here, I think, because there's been a revolution of consciousness. That's what they call it, revolución de las conciencias. That means they wake people up. So instead of people being asleep, the people are awake. The people are engaged with the system. They're checking out all the candidates, pulling out every little bit of corruption. Someone in Mexico will find it. The people are awake. There's been a revolution of thinking, of a rejection of the neoliberal model that was pushed by Washington. And that's why Morena is so successful. They've got a supermajority. We're going to have to see what they do with it. But I think the future is very bright for Mexico because there's been this revolución de las conciencias. So that's why we got to keep supporting from afar. We can't fall prey to the corporate media and its lies. So we got to keep on going and be in solidarity.
So there are coups that succeed and there are the soft coups, but also many other tries and attempts by U.S. imperialists to further escalate and violence over Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. They have tried to make a Cuban exclusive media, a social media platform where that would influence the people's perspective on the Cuban government, of which they have not officially enacted that, thankfully. But in Venezuela and in Nicaragua, they have a free press, which of course they would demonize the government at the same time, because they're still trying to overthrow the Sandinista project as well as the whole project. So, whilst other attempts, for the violent one, Peru has been, at this recent point in 2022, some experts in Peru view that this is a second Operation Condor, with it being that there were massacres against the coup, who wanted an actual democracy, who were fighting for a new constitution, because the previous government was ousted, and that government, which campaigned for no más pobres and país rico, which means no more poor people in this country. After they were ousted, the people took to the streets to show that this government is illegitimate. The government of Dina Asesina. Dina Boluarte and the Corrupt Congress, which is controlled by the far right, have been passing many legislation to further cement their neoliberal, neocolonial control over the country as a neocolonial entity for the U.S., Southcom, to break up the Patria Grande, to break up the Pan-American vision, of which we need, just like we need the Pan-African vision. Why does the European Union have one? Why do they get to unite and have the same currency? They get to modernize much rapidly, and because of the colonial history as well. But they are trying to impede every attempt to our people's success in the global south, and even to create our own destiny, because what Jose Carlos Marietti says is that we certainly do not want socialism in Latin America to be a copy or imitation. It should be a heroic creation. We have to give it life to Indo-American socialism. At that time, Indo meaning Indian at the time. So before then, before Karl Marx and such, before he created the term socialism and communism, this was Inca, the Inca civilization that had their own Inca socialism and Inca communism, as how Mariátegui framed it. And of course, that legacy has come through because of the colonial empires, not just Spain, but further with the U.S. empire, further keeping a neo-colonial government under the Monroe Doctrine, so they could continue extracting the natural resources and oppressing the people who are overexploited. They don't want this system. They recognize that this is an imperialist vision of where many Peruvian youth have no opportunity, so they want to move abroad, especially to the United States, where the wealth is concentrated here as well, where all the natural resources, all the products that were manufactured out of this are here, where we get to live luxuriously. I have family members that view that way of life, that who are not politically active, but don't recognize that, don't make these connections yet, that they're just chasing the money, they're just chasing the fame and such. Just like here in the United States, many of the young people do who are not politically active. So when it comes to this, every time they're trying to have people do color revolutions in Latin America, as well as in other parts of the world, but color revolutions in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and in Cuba. So these socialist projects recognize that there's a lot of solidarity with each other there, and the Peru Libre Party and Free Peru, they understand that they need to make these connections too, because the previous influence communist groups like Sendero Luminoso were anti-Cuban. They were not in support of the socialist creation in Cuba for political differences in the Marxist space. So that's why Peru Libre has been fostering a political relationship with the Cubans. The founder, Vladimir Cerrón, he has traveled to Cuba, and his mother lives over there too. Cuba has received many people around the world, and high-ranking officials too. Like there's a lot of solidarity with these countries. From Cuba, is part of the old guard, just like Nicaragua, to provide a lot of the support. So Nicaragua, for that case, in the 45th Sandinista Revolution anniversary this past July, they had the Leila Khaled, the Palestinian Freedom Project. She was invited and she was received to give a speech, and the PFLP had a long history with the FSLN, a deep solidarity. That's why they have in the struggle together. They understand that the Vietnamese war, the Vietnamese fighting against the U.S. imperialists was the same. It's the same right now with the Palestinians fighting against the Israelis. It's the same thing as with the Sandinistas versus the Contras that were U.S. backed. So, but the other type of coups attempts are through the election. For example, in Nicaragua, during the 1990s, they had this group called UNO, which stands for Unión Nacional Opositora, National Opposition Union, which had actually two communist parties working with this coalition. This was a U.S. funded coalition of right-wingers mainly, some liberal factions that were upset that the Sandinista revolution was victorious, even though they were in support of removing the dictatorship, because the dictatorship was very vicious, just like the Fujimori government, just like Israel right now. So they had these. So they had Chamorro coming to power through after their victory through the election. So technically, it's not a coup, but the U.S. government is going to try to undermine these revolutions and to reinstitute neoliberal governments and the fascistic governments, and so they could break up the solidarity that we have. That they're broken up that in Peru, where Peru used to be the same position as Venezuela. So right now, Venezuela has broken 7 countries, diplomatic ties with 7 countries. Peru in 2022 and 2023, when the massacres were happening, the world leaders were looking at it as, what are you doing, Peru? Why are you committing all these massacres? They were in solidarity with the Petro Castillo, all these leaders, from Daniel Ortega to Nicolas Maduro, to all sorts of world leaders in Latin America were talking about Petro Castillo. They knew that this was a coup against him, and AMLO was trying to get asylum to him, but Castillo was captured and arrested because his bodyguard and his driver was bought and corrupted. So they have him locked up. He's put in prison. So so after he was in prison, Peru had broken a lot of diplomatic relations. They considered Evo Morales as a persona non grata figure, as I think as well as Gustavo Petro. So they're breaking up their relations with their neighboring countries because they're not in solidarity with the left-wing project around across the continent.
All right. So, huge round of applause for correspondent news and investigative journalist Abraham Marquez. And a round of applause for Peruvian activist, organizer, human rights consultant, and co-founder of Los Ronderos de las Redes, Paolo Cruzalegui. And finally, a huge round of applause for the organizer of the Peace and Freedom Party and member of the Placito Olvera and Huntington Morena Party, Dr. Rodolfo Cortez Barragan. This is the last panel of a 3-day event. So special thanks to Midnight Books, Gabe over there. So moving on, we are going to do a Q&A briefly. We're going to do 1 or 2, and depending on the time, we'll check with Gabe and see if we can do a third one or not. After that, if you still have questions, you're free to approach the speakers and talk to them. So let's get that first question, Q&A.
Thank you so much for this. My question is, when the U.S. sanctions a Latin American country, how does the Latin American community respond? Or are they even allowed to respond? And so, yeah.
Well, I would say, here in the U.S., if you go around, you go talk to any regular people, you ask them what's a sanction, I wouldn't even know what that is. In most countries, they do know that. And they'll tell you exactly how it's affecting your life. And it's psychological warfare. So they'll tell you exactly how it's affecting their life and how it's unfair and which is why they defend their country that's independent. So they are about to respond. And I think the people in Iran, Latin America, any country that's heavily sanctioned, they know what it is because the media tells them, and their government tells them what it is. So it's not like here where it's like they throw that word out, goes over your head, you go by your life. So yeah, they are able to respond.
All right. We have a second question here.
Hey, what's up? But this is related to U.S. Policies, how U.S. uses liberal democracy to destabilize Latin American country. So every time there's a leftist party that comes into power, they implement and institute social policies to protect the marginalized classes. But as soon as the right-wing party comes in, they overturn it and like undo everything else. So do you think liberal democracy in Latin America is helpful or harmful while U.S. stays hegemonic power in this hemisphere?
All right. Excellent question. Who wants to answer?
Yes, so this is, of course, the eternal question, right? So when we're talking about really all countries and their liberatory struggle, so I would advocate that each country has its own context, its own contingencies. So that's why I personally support the liberation movements all around the world. We have to really look at it like that. It can't be that we have a particular frame, a particular thought of how exactly liberation should happen. I support, indeed, in the United States, we talk a lot about, say, having a socialist revolution. Well, that's us talking about that, right? In Mexico, for example, I'm from Mexico, they're not talking about that. Am I going to stamp them from talking about how their own struggles? That doesn't seem right to me. Just, how can I intervene? And, yes, I am Mexican, but, I don't live there, of course. So we have to be respectful, I think, of their own struggles, their way of talking about their history, right? Mexico has a particular way of talking about their history and what they're doing right now in their current historical stage. The fourth transformation of Mexico. That's how they refer to it. That's how I think about it. I think we should support them because we have to be in solidarity with the people of the world against imperialism from our own country. Imperialism.
All right. Powerful stuff. We do have enough time for one more question. I see you with the hand, but we do have the gentleman over here who had his hand raised.
I was gonna ask, do you give a comment on how it's not just taking over the actual government, but also reform, well not reform, but redoing the judicial system, how they maintain neoliberalism. Because in Mexico, even though Morena party took over, they passed a regular law trying to be able to give lower prices on electric power. But the court struck it down and is there a plan for any of I'm not sure about Peru yet, but is there also in Nicaragua, how did they reform their judicial reform? And is Mexico planning on doing a judicial reform to, even though, because right now they have a majority, will they be able to do constitutional reform so they won't be struck down by the district court? Because even though it doesn't matter if we take over the government, as long as the judicial power is still part of the state, so as long as the state's still there by the judicial power, as long as we don't reform it, we could try to pass as many laws as possible to help the people, but if the judicial power is there to strike it down, it's not going to be able to move forward. Is there a plan and Nicaragua done? Yeah.
All right. Interesting question. I was informed that we will have accessibility for more questions, but for you, sir?
Well, I will pass the mic to my compañeros, but to touch on Peru and other places in South America. So Peru has been fighting for a new constitution after this neoliberal constitution of the Fujimori dictatorship. So while it's still being implemented, once it's still there, there's the 12th constitution. This neoliberal government is making matters worse in Peru, where we just recently just a couple of days ago, the International Indigenous Peoples Day, the Peruvian government being so racist and anti-indigenous that they they just implemented the law that would give a blanket amnesty to the war criminals, to the genocidaires from the Fujimori government and past administrations, um, giving impunity to these crimes against humanity, basically, from Fujimori's sterilization of 300,000 or so indigenous people back then, or the Cantuta massacre and other massacres that took place from the Grupo Colina far-right death squad from the Fujimori government that were unofficially part of the government. But yeah, they were orchestrating this violent oppression against the people because they assumed that the indigenous and campesinos were aligned with the communist guerrillas and who they labeled as terrorists during the civil war period, of which the internal armed conflict never ended. So in 2021, when Pedro Castillo was running for president, he joined on board with the Peru Libre party as a Rondero, as a union leader, as a speaker. He himself being indigenous, there have been many presidents in Peru that were not indigenous, but from the white criollo elite. So he understands the problems of the Peruvian people. And so the Peru Libre party is a Marxist-Leninist party, still have some representatives in the elected in the congressional legislature. But after the ouster of Pedro Castillo, they could not implement a new constitution to a constituent assembly. But the people are still clamoring for that action. But through the removal of the Congress, of which has been the biggest impediment for social progress, for land reform, for other socialistic gains for the people, because this is a neo-colonial entity for the U.S. government to continue having transnational corporations to exploit the people, exploit natural resources, and destroy the environment to completely deforest. It's worse than what it is now, what has been in Brazil, where Brazil under Bolsonaro basically was the center of colonial period of a modern time. That's why Bolsonaro and Bolsonaristas are Zionist supporters. That's why Bolsonaro has a close relation with Netanyahu, Bennett, and with Israel overall. The same thing with Argentina. These new colonial leaders are there to oppress the people. They don't want the constitutional reform unless it is to implement a neoliberal period there. Just like it was before Chile into Pinochet. But we need a constitutional change. That's the massive change that we need for each country, especially the United States. The United States never had any other constitution, only the one in the founding of the country after their American Revolution. And they've had 27 amendments. First one being the freedom of speech. How could you forget about the right to protest or for politicization and so forth, or the right to privacy in another amendment. So, or even the right for women to have to vote, to get out the second-class citizen status in the United States. I mean, or even for slavery. And we haven't even actually had the slavery abolished completely through the 13th Amendment. This country needs that massive reform too. We're at the starting process of this revolution here in the United States, and we're looking to Latin America. And that's what we're here for. We're looking to other examples, whether that was a guerrilla tactics like Che Guevara and Fidel Castro being the old guard in the 20th century, or the electoral sphere when it came to Hugo Chavez getting elected to power and continuing to be elected to Maduro, to Chavismo, and to retain those gains. I'll stop.
Yes, great question. I have a little pamphlet here to tell people more about it. But yes, the question is about the judicial reform that is going to happen in Mexico. Because guess what? Just like in the United States, when the legislators do manage to get elected and they're on the left or progressive, and say they pass something, well, the judicial branch right, vetoes it. They say, oh, that's not constitutional, right? We see that in the United States all the time. So in Mexico, as the question referenced, that is what happens. It's happening right now. Why? Because the judicial branch is indeed it's an organ that's controlled as of right now by the oligarchy. It's kind of their last bastion of support of it's how they're keeping the line, attempting to, right? They slowed down a bunch of the projects that President AMLO had, like the train, the Maya train, many water-related projects in a certain part of the country, just everything they could do to stand in his way. But now, because the Mexican people appreciate what AMLO and the Morena Party have done so much, they delivered a supermajority to Morena and their coalition affiliates. So what's going to happen over the next few months is what's really interesting. If you're asking a contemporary question, right? So the hope, expectation is that Morena and their party affiliates will pass this constitutional reform to make it so that those judges that are currently there, completely corrupt, with 100% with the oligarchy, will be removed from power, and the people will have things like elected federal judges. We don't have elected federal judges. We have local elected judges, but Mexico is saying that all judges should be elected. Those on the Supreme Court will be elected, and they'll be able to represent kind of the wishes of the people. A far more updated judicial interpretation of the law, etc. So it's going to be for the people. So they're going to have to vote on it. It's coming up, right? So it's coming up. There's a lot of debate. There's concerns that the U.S. will intervene in some way. We're going to have to wait and see. It's a contemporary issue.
In Nicaragua, recently the government shut down a private university, and the corporate media here was like, all the dictators attacking education. He just made it public. He made it public available to everyone. And that's what you can do when you have a party that's in power, that's serving the people. And that's what Morena's looking to do. Now they have this majority. And then it's all out. I mean, that's the power of the party.
All right. So now I'm going to go to you. I've been informed by Gabe and the panelists that we want to hear all your questions because you guys showed up to get some information today.
Right now, there's horrible neoliberalism in Argentina, right? And that's really so scary. So I just want to know, how do you feel about people's movement in Argentina against this neoliberal?
All right. Make sure you guys are ready with those questions. Who wants to take this one?
Well, of course, we are in favor of the people taking to the streets in mass, and we've seen it. Hundreds of thousands. I just imagine it to be millions right now. But since Javier Milei got into power, people have been taken to the streets. Even though he got elected through democratic means, people dislike him a lot. He's been cutting a lot of the cabinets in his government from the previous administration, which was a center-left party, center-left leadership at the time. But Javier Milei has taken to the extreme as a fanatic for neoliberalism, as a so-called libertarian, of which he is pro-Zionist. He's met with Donald Trump at CPAC. He's met with Jair Bolsonaro at the Brazilian version of CPAC. As I said, he's quite fanatic about the ultra-conservatism of the solidarity that they have with the far right internationally. And so, of course, we have to reject that government. Just like in Peru, we've been taken to the street against this dictatorship. The massacres in Peru from 2022 to 2023, about 76 officially counted. Some say more. But yeah, even though it comparatively less to other struggles like in Palestine, we take a lot of offense as the Peruvians that this government is literally killing us for protesting for democracy or rejecting against the coup government. Because this government, right now, the polls say that 88% disapprove this government's handling. Only 6% approve of the Diana Boluarte government in Peru. This is just in ginormous sense. This is how big that is of a difference. 71% to say that they don't trust Boluarte at all. So the congressional body has less approval ratings as well. But it's the same thing with the U.S. government. We rejected the U.S. government, and the ones who are politically conscious of the fact that this two-party dictatorship is giving us the same results, more neoliberalism and more neo-fascism, no matter which your president is coming from. But more wars, more coups, more escalations against China, Russia, Iran, and the next president from and either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is going to make the situation worse, much more worse than in Palestine. It's bought and paid for by the impact. And that's why we have to continue staying in the streets, for Palestine, for Peru, for Argentina, for Venezuela. We need to show a lot of solidarity with Venezuela right now during this coup attempt, which it technically failed, but the media is still portraying that even in Peru, the oligarchy-controlled media is portraying that Maduro is a dictator. So that's warping the narrative of how ordinary Peruvians see the Venezuelan government right now. And that's how they view the Venezuelan migrants who came to Peru with nothing but just with their families. And so they're also coming out of poverty to flee from poverty, but due to the sanctions. So we have to understand and make these connections, and so we can show our solidarity. And that's why in Los Honduras shows our solidarity with a lot of struggles like Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, and so forth. Because we need to show that we have a lot of solidarity. Because we speak a common language. We come from the same struggle. The U.S. has food in countless countries, some more so than others, because they are fighting back. They've been fighting back against U.S. imperialism.
All right. We do have a few more questions. Make sure you guys have that question in mind. I see you, and we're gonna go to you, sir, over here.
Okay, so I just want to know, so simple. Why the hell can't anyone sanction the hell out of the United States?
Powerful question. Why the hell can't we sanction the United States? Who wants to take this one?
If I remember this saying that the reason that there's no coups in the U.S. is because there's no embassy here. I mean, we're seeing the world kind of unite against U.S. imperialism and the U.S. domination, the rise of BRICS, and countries that are on the other side of sanctioning working together. You saw the president that passed through Iran visiting all the countries in Latin America, building those connection points, those networks. So they can't sanction the U.S., but they can work together and isolate the U.S. in a way. So.
All right, screw the United States. Here we go now.
Hi, comrades. Thank you so much. My question is for Abraham. You mentioned earlier that you had gone to Nicaragua to observe the elections. I was wondering if you could speak more on that, and then maybe elaborate a little bit as to why the United States continuously debunks Venezuela's elections. So yeah, give us some insight to the validity of the elections in Venezuela, what you witnessed in Nicaragua, and I guess, yeah, just elaborate on that. And maybe you're a writer. Do you have any articles about what you experienced or saw in Nicaragua?
All right, lots to pack in there. I thought I heard 2 or 3 questions in there, but I know you're ready for this.
Thank you, sir. You're doing a good job. My experience in Nicaragua with the elections was life-changing. I'll be honest with you right now. It was on a Sunday. Every place we went to had, I would say, 50 people that were working. Some of them were at schools, so used different classrooms to be able to go in to make your vote. They had services for the elderly. They had services for if you're pregnant or you can walk. It was a fully functioning democracy. Something you don't really see here. Here, election day on Tuesday, right? We try to get out of work, with traffic. So there, it's like the whole country just kind of mobilizes for it. And I speak to a lot of people, and a lot of people said the same thing. Was the Sandinista party, and Ortega is the first person in the country's history that actually cares about the poor people. And they actually care about them. And they see that every day. And being there and seeing that, it was like, man, I wish all of us can go there and experience that and bring that here. As far as stuff that I've written about Nicaragua, when I was there, some of the Sandinistas were saying that they didn't know what to expect from the U.S. They knew that the U.S. was going to do something, but they didn't know what. And then what came afterwards is it's like what they do in every country. It was the immediate of like as a dictator, an official, this man, and they get the puppets to say the same thing across Latin America. At that time, Nicaragua recognized Taiwan. That was the trading partner. So they said, well, if the U.S. wants to sanction, and they actually did sanction Nicaragua right after that. The Ransom Act was published a few weeks later in response to that. So what Nicaragua did was they dropped Taiwan and recognized China. And now Nicaragua's trading partner went from a country with I think around 2 million people to a country with over 1 billion people. And they already started working on trading routes. Their future goal is to have a canal with Nicaragua, because it's the way it's centered in Central America and Central America. And so that's like a future long project that they recently published about. So I got to write about Nicaragua recognizing China as their trading partner. And what does that mean? Because the U.S. denounced Nicaragua for doing that, yet the U.S. recognizes China too. So they did exactly what every North American country does. But for some reason, it's bad faith. So I got to write about that. I got to interview some of the officials, the government officials there. You can find on Twitter Freedom. That's the website. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Anyone else? I have this gentleman too. All right.
Hi, thank you for everything. With the Palestinian genocide taking place right now, and we've all, I think, become a little more aware and learned a lot about what's been going on for so long, right? And I'd like to ask you if you could elaborate on Israel's role in Latin America, and specifically in Central America and Mexico, I think. And with the election of Claudia Sheinbaum, I think a lot of speculation or nerves have risen about her Jewish origin, right? So if you could elaborate on that and yeah, a little bit.
All right, the role of Israel in Latin America, and where the president falls. All right, we got two people who will answer your question.
As far as Mexico, Israel has been involved in Mexico for a long time. Probably the most high-profile case is you've probably heard Pegasus. It's been all over the New York Times. Pegasus is a piece of software that was developed by an Israeli company. It's used by their military. It has been given freely. Was during the Peña Nieto years to Mexico as is believed a test run. So the Pegasus software allows for a pretty detailed and expansive spying, hacking into people's phones. So it's definitely been there. My reading, there's a lot. This is actually one of the things that people bring up when trying to accuse the current governor AMLO of not being a legitimate leftist, essentially. And I've actually attempted to go through the claims from the New York Times. They say, oh, this research group found this, that, oh, the Mexican army, they used it in some way. But actually, if you go through what they're claiming and you go to the, quote, original sources, you'll see that that's not what those sources are saying. It's not saying that the Pegasus definitely showed up and say a journalist's phone. Like, they don't claim to have concrete evidence, but yet somehow the corporate media uses the idea that they're spying, which there definitely has been in Mexico for sure. Obrador ended that contract with that Israeli company. It is believed, he says it's no longer used. Could it be in some computer somewhere, in some military installation? Probably. Maybe it gets automated automatically. Maybe all the way from Israel. Who knows? Right? If you know about computers, you know it's really complicated. But there has been, that's really probably the highest profile, because it was in particular with Ayotzinapa. When Ayotzinapa, the disappeared students in 2014, it was believed that, attorneys were spying on them. But then those attorneys, who are those attorneys? Those attorneys that were claimed to be victims of the Mexican government actually turn up to be paid by U.S. aid, a kind of a CIA operation. So I don't believe personally that Pegasus is willfully being used to prosecute journalists or anything like that currently in Mexico, but it's been used. It's been abused for sure. So that's one way that Israel has intervened in Mexico. It's very high profile. Look into it. It's not what it seems, or not what the New York Times claims it is. So in regards to Dr. Sheinbaum, one of the interesting things is that, yes, she is of Jewish descent. Her parents are from Eastern Europe, and her grandparents, her parents were both born in Mexico. The Jewish community says in many high-profile journals or newspapers, quote, they don't claim her as one of their own, because she has not been a part of the Jewish community in Mexico City. You can actually look at a map of like how the city of Mexico City voted, and they show the most Jewish area, the lowest support for Dr. Sheinbaum. So there's not she's very, even though she is of course Jewish heritage, she's overall Mexican, which is a general category, right? There's many groups that call themselves Mexican, that are Mexicans, because Mexico is increasingly talking about itself, like Bolivia, as a plurinational, pluricultural state. So as far as I've observed, Dr. Sheinbaum has definitely allowed Obrador to be the one to address the genocide of the Palestinian people, because that's a tradition within Mexico, that the president is really the one leading that. So I would expect that she's going to continue the same kind of approach that Obrador has had, which Mexico filed with South Africa, for example, to take Israel to court. They've had statements. Have they been as strong as we here in the U.S. left would like? No, probably not. So it comes down to they're operating under a lot of constraints, right? So what's going to happen is could they face a coup for one particular statement? It's possible. So I'm sure that kind of calculus goes into it. But I don't believe that Dr. Scheinbaum is going to be in any way like a Zionist. That's not who she is. That's not who she said she is. It's not who people say she is, or including the Jewish community in Mexico City, which is very progressive and not Zionist, actually.
I would say the relationship between the Zionists and Latin America is a colonial one, imperialist one, because the same company that built the border along the U.S.-Mexico border is the same one that built the apartheid wall in Palestine. The LAPD since some of their officers they train the Zionists. So you have the Zionists and they also train with the death squads in Central America. So it's a brutal one. It's not a humanitarian one. Short.
I want to touch on the topic of solidarity with Palestine, with Latin America. We've seen so many countries in this region showing the solidarity. Nicaragua being the first one to join South Africa's case of genocide against Israel. Because Nicaragua has prosecuted the U.S. government after the Sandinista revolution for arming and funding and training the Contras. And although Nicaragua won that case at the ICJ in the 1980s, they did not receive reparations, even though the ICJ gave that ruling to do so. The U.S. Did not recognize that ruling because they are, the so-called authoritarian government, which they claim Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba. They are the rogue state, just like Israel is. So many more countries have followed suit after Nicaragua around the world, but as well as in Latin America. Some countries that gave their statements. And some leaders that gave their statements in solidarity, like Lula or Gustavo Petro. In Peru, particularly, they have a Palestinian embassy. They have an embassy for Palestine, but here in the United States, we do not, even though we have a large diaspora. In Latin America, the Arab community immigrated to different parts of Latin America. In Guatemala, I think it's the highest amount, like 500,000 Palestinians living over there. A lot more in Honduras. El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, is part of the Palestinian. But yeah, in South America, Peru has a long history since like 1948, when Palestinians came to Cusco. They built a monument. It was made by Christian Palestinians. They built a smaller statue, like the one in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's called the Corpus Christi. And this white Jesus Christ figure is a symbol of the unity of the Palestinian people, the Arab community, with the Spanish-speaking world, because some of the words are originated from Arabic, and some Spanish words are from Arabic, and the Lebanese as well is a big part of the diaspora. Lebanese people have migrated to Latin America, largest being in Brazil, second largest being in Colombia. That's where we got Alex Saab. He's part of the Colombian and the Lebanese. He lives in Venezuela now. He's a very, very strong supporter of the Maduro government because he, because, because he was also imprisoned by the Americans, just like the Julian Assange, just like here, Leonard Peltier, an indigenous leader here, or Mumia Abu-Jamal, or what's happening right now with the Uhuru 3, Chairman Wally Chapella, the African People's Socialist Party, Penny Pez, and Jesse Neville, or on that point, there's a lot of political prisoners in here in the diaspora. In Latin America. The most recent one being Daniel Jadu in Chile, who was elected a communist figure, mayor, but now he's in prison under Chile's Boric government. And Boric, even though they have the largest population of Palestinians, and he's in solidarity with Palestine, but also with Ukraine as an anti-war stance, but a pro-imperialist good one, and for that matter. And Chile's turn is to make a right turn with the Boric government, it's no longer a leftist. But yeah, I think Peru has 70,000 Palestinians, and they've been protesting in the streets of Lima and other parts, and in Cusco, show this solidarity with Palestine.
All right. I think that is it. We are out of time. But if you guys want to continue to ask questions, you guys can come. Right, you know what? Let's one last question right here. Sir, you get the chance to take it away.
I only, you can say yes or no. Okay. Well, I'm so happy. I was here yesterday and I'm so happy to see like the other people. And this is not, we are learning from each other. And one, I would like to ask you, first, how many, we talk about Latin Americans, how many of you know or have an idea about the Monroe Doctrine? Because everything goes to that. If we talk about Latin America. My question to you guys is, do you think this empire is in decline? One. The other question is, we talk about the Middle East. I'm trying to get in geopolitics. I'm a fanatic. If you guys think that, for example, like Israel with the ethnic cleansing going on, is trying to become another superpower, especially now that we, since 2014, we entered to multipolar powers. I want to hear you guys.
All right. 1 minute response from all the speakers.
I'll be short, but the question about is the empire in decline? Man, I wish. To be honest, I wish. I think now seeing what's happening in Gaza, and we can't even get a ceasefire. And that's not even a radical idea. We can't even pass a ceasefire resolution. Is tells me that the empire is pretty strong. Unfortunately, that's
I think we're running out of time. When we look at the perspective of the Palestinian, the Palestinian people facing this catastrophic genocide, we feel we're in strong solidarity with that. As you can see in this room, we understand that because we were in the same position back then in Guatemala or in Nicaragua, that Israel was the U.S. and but I think Israel knows its role of, they have this good opportunity to massacre, this onslaught, to finish their, how the evangelicals view it in the United States and other parts of the United States, the Bolsonaros, world, or the communist elites of the world, they support this evangelical notion that we need to have a state of Israel, and to involve the Jewish world and move there to, with the expense of people's lives, whether they're Palestinian Jews, Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, or even Armenians who live in a quarter of Jerusalem. I think it is collapsing. The U.S. empire is collapsing, but it's very slow. I mean, we're in a very slow process. I mean, just imagine that we are, we on Earth, it's been billions of years of evolving. We evolved for a long time. It's going to take a long time. It might be in our lifetime, but that's why we're working towards that process. That's why we're young. That's why we are getting the wisdom from our elderly. That we understand the same process of the same enemy. We have the same common enemy. The U.S. empire is just the conquistadors, the transnational corporations that are in service of the entire U.S. military industrial complex.
I agree with both of you that the empire seems to be in decline. There's problems. There's problems for the empire abroad. There's troubles within the empire. But as Abraham points out, it is very difficult for the people to have any kind of change. We certainly have no political power. There's a genocide being carried out in our name. There's attacks on our own people here. The only thing that we can do as we observe this process is to continue to engage with each other in solidarity, which I think is what we've done this weekend. I think that's been an amazing process. I think we have to continue that. We have to keep talking to each other, keep building with each other, so that we can be triumphant and be in solidarity with the people here, or locally, or in this country, and all around the world, so that we can all achieve liberation together.
All right. That brings this 3-day event to a close. Give a round of applause for our last panel. And once again, thank you, Gabe and Midnight Cook, for hosting this event. Thank you. Make sure you look around. Pick up a book before you go home. And don't forget there's stands outside so you can look at that too. All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.